Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with cast iron cornbread. That's right, there's not many things easier to make than cornbread, which is why it's such a perfect choice when you need to bring something to a barbecue or a cookout. Oh, and by the way, if you've stopped watching the video because you don't have a cast iron pan, you should start watching again because you do not need a cast iron pan to make this. But anyway, like I was saying, this is the perfect thing to bring to a barbecue because it's simple to make, everybody loves it, and it's way cheaper than bringing meat. Although that last reason for bringing it we should probably keep to ourselves. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started by melting a dangerously large amount of butter in this cast iron skillet that we have set over medium heat. And the game plan here is once this melts, we're going to use half in the batter and then leave half in the pan to bake the cornbread in. So all we need to do is wait for this to melt and then simply turn off the heat and reserve it till needed. And then what we'll do once our butter's melted is move on to this extremely simple batter, which we will start with some stone ground cornmeal, or at least that's how it was sold to me. I would love to tour one of these cornmeal factories to see if they're really using stones. I have a feeling that's just an expression. But anyway, to our possibly stone ground cornmeal, we will add some salt, as well as a little shake of cayenne. Just a little shake. And then we're also going to want to add some kind of sweetener here, which is usually white sugar, or sometimes brown sugar, but I really do prefer honey. I just think it gives it a little more interesting flavor. Plus keeps the local bees busy. And then after our honey, we will plop in a couple large eggs. I've always felt plop is an underrated food verb. And then after the eggs, we're going to need some kind of dairy product, which could be many things. In my case, it's going to be buttermilk. And then once that's in, we'll go ahead and give this a quick mix before adding the rest of the ingredients. And by the way, how much milk or buttermilk you add at this point is going to determine the final texture of your cornbread. Alright, since I don't really like dry cornbreads, I'm going to use a good amount here. But if you do prefer something a little drier and crumblier, you can definitely cut that back, and I will be touching on that in the blog post. And then once that's combined, we'll go ahead and add some self-rising flour, which as you all know is just regular flour with some baking powder milled into it. And the reason I like to add this after everything else is mixed is because the more you mix this white flour, the more gluten you develop. And if you overmix it, your bread can get a little tough and chewy. So by mixing everything first and then this at the end, I think it might help us avoid that issue. So a pretty smart strategy if I do say so myself. Unless, of course, you forget to mix in half the butter, which I did. But that's okay, these things happen. So I went ahead and added exactly half that melted butter from the pan. And don't measure, just eye it. And I thought by spooning it over like this, I would minimize the amount of mixing needed. And I went ahead and stirred that in. Oh, and in case you're wondering, which you really should be, we could have added half our melted butter right when we added our buttermilk. That probably would have been the best time. And not to spoil the ending, but this really didn't have any negative effect. And then what we'll do once all this is combined is grab a spatula and transfer that into our cast iron pan, which theoretically contains half the butter we melted. Oh, and I should mention you can actually make everything up to this point and then just wrap this tight in foil, and then bring it to the barbecue uncooked and finish it near or on the fire. So just a little something to keep in mind. But anyway, we'll go ahead and transfer our batter in, at which point we will very carefully transfer this into the center of a 400-degree oven for about 25 minutes or so, or until it looks like this. And if you want, you can test this with a toothpick, and it should come out clean. But you know what? I didn't even bother, because I knew this was done. And if you're thinking, hey, it looks like it has some burn spots, those are actually milk solids from the butter that have formed some caramelized crumbs on the top. And if those bother you and or you're going to take some pictures, you can go ahead and brush those off. Although they really don't provide any off taste. So this really is 100% unnecessary. And then whether you're crumb brushing or not, you should probably let this cool down a little bit before you slice it. Alright, warm's good and room temp's good. But I'm not a big fan of cutting baked goods while they're piping hot. But anyway, you decide. You are, after all, the Jason Bourne of when to eat your bread made from corn. But personally, I do let it cool down, which this has, so I'm going to go ahead and cut a piece. And as usual, the first piece is the hardest to cut without screwing it up. But as you can see, it actually came out pretty well. Although it did kind of crack in half into two pieces, which I took as a sign to eat one of them. And that, my friends, was a great couple bites of cornbread. Alright, it was tender and delicate without being too crumbly, and sort of dense and moist without being too heavy. And as promised, the tang from the buttermilk balances the sweetness of the honey perfectly. So I really do love this version, and I deemed it worthy to set next to some smoked brisket, and baked beans and greens. And even though it already had almost too much butter, I decided to spread a little more on the top, as tradition dictates. And yes, if I was smart, I would have warmed that back up, so I could get the always provocative melting butter money shot. But still, even cold, with maybe too much butter, it still was magnificent. And I should add, is easy to adapt. Alright, if I'm serving this with some barbecue, maybe I do a more savory version that's a little bit on the moister side. Whereas if I'm going to serve it with a spicy chili, I might do a drier version that has a little more sweetness to balance the spice. But regardless whether you make it as is, or tweak it to your taste, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy